The following lore, included in Lost Notes Groupies, is based on personal histories of sex, drugs, and rock and roll from the previous century. Any stories, as told to us, belong solely to the speakers and their memories. Previously on Groupies.
Being in the GTOs gave me a platform. I felt like now I could live my life the way I wanted to. I was part of something that was even bigger than me.
I just wanted to get in that hotel room because I figured all the good stuff was happening in there.
So we wrote these songs about our crazy lives and we recorded them. I mean, I wished it had gone further.
By the end of the 1960s, rock and roll was no longer counterculture. It was simply the culture. Rock bands weren't just stars. They were gods. Young ones. The Beatles, the Stones, Zeppelin. These deified musicians were then just dudes in their 20s. And to paraphrase John Lennon, they were more popular than Jesus. So in basements and bedrooms and bop rooms everywhere, there were young girls desperately trying to, well, come to Jesus. Or the next best thing.
I wanted to know, beyond saving the money, going to the Sears and Roebuck and buying the album and looking at it, beyond that, then what? Well, now they're coming to town. Well, then what? Where do they go? What do they do? They're real people doing real things, and I wanted to know what that was.
In 1965, Dee Dee Keel was 15, religiously devoted to rock and roll, and ready to trade liner notes for the real world. She was living with her parents in Venice Beach, which was where she first became mesmerized by her neighbor Jim Morrison, who each evening at dusk, sporting what I can only imagine were incredibly sweaty leather pants and a guitar, squeaked his way along the sandy shore of the Pacific. So when the Lizard King himself slithered up from the beach to Hollywood, Dee Dee was not far behind, because it dawned on her that the Strip was the place where she'd be able to see other soon-to-be rock gods, in the flesh. Dee Dee had made some girlish attempts to try to get to know some of her early crushes, such as Gene Cornish from the Young Rascals, like calling him up at his hotel room and asking if he wanted any company. And did you have a sense that, like, you were going to go in there and hook up with them? Was that like, you're like, I wanted them? You're just like, I just want to see what's going on. And
I wanted to hang out.
Yeah.
I wanted to hang out, and I wanted to absorb whatever that was that they were doing. I wanted to hear their stories. I wanted to hear about the songs. But, you know, I'm sure he had a different idea. But in the 70s, it was a whole different story. Back then, at the age 20, 21, I think we were pretty much up for anything. If there was some guy that I thought was cute, now this is before I got married. If there was a guy that I thought would be cute and I wanted to know him, I'd just go up and usually I'd go up and put my arm through his and say, I'm your date for the night. And they always said, okay. And I got to know him that way. So from 71 to 73, there was a lot of grouping being done in there.
From KCRW and Golden Teapot, this is Lost Notes Groupies, and I'm Dylan Tupper-Rupert. This season, I'm taking you into the world of the legendary groupies of the Sunset Strip, from the pill to the dawn of punk. And we're in the 1970s now, bitch! Buckle up. Even though technically in the 70s in the state of California it wasn't legally required to buckle up, but anyway. Though she was turned away by a young rascal for being, well, too young and too rascally, Dee Dee's initial close encounters with the rock and roll kind emboldened her. Even if being turned away for being too underage was soon to become a rare scenario on the Sunset Strip. She observed that one of the best ways to integrate yourself was to be young, hot, and just start walking around. Dee Dee called this routine the promenade. The same kind of promenade she witnessed Miss Pamela and her fellow GTOs perform up and down the Strip night after night.
One of my favorite stories of my life was actually getting Lee Stevens from Blue Cheer. I really love this guy, and I really wanted him so badly. I promenaded. He wasn't the least bit interested in me until one night. He just came up and said, "Let's go." I didn't even care where we were going. All right, let's do it. Let's go. And I saw him several times, but it was almost like he finally went, "Okay, I've been through all of them. How about you?" It's really terrible, but that was okay.
Once Dee Dee had her promenade routine down, she leveled up her strategies. Like, she got really strategic. If Dee Dee hadn't gone into the music industry, she might have done really well for herself as a lawyer or like a private eye.
I really, really wanted to get to know Jeff Beck. I really wanted to know this guy. And he was going to be impossible to get, but he happened to be in town with his band, going to work with Stevie Wonder. And I thought, okay, I'm not going to go for him because he's going to be hard to go for. I'm going to go for his drummer. And the girls were all like waiting, you know, everybody wanted to be with Jeff Beck. I called up the hotel and left a message for the drummer, and he called me back. And I said, "Hey, do you remember me from," I said, the Speakeasy in London, never been there. "Oh, my memory's kind of gone, but hey, want to come see Stevie Wonder? Want to meet me there?" "Yeah." He says, "Well, when you see me, come up," and he literally said, "Sock me in the jaw or something so I remember you." And so I walked up and went, and we spent the night together, and we talked about all kinds of musical stuff, and we had the best night ever. It was really fun. And I took him back to the hotel, and I was like, that was really fun. I had such a great night with him. Well, just a few nights later, I'm in the whiskey, and I feel somebody breathing on my neck, and I turn over, and it's Jeff Beck. He had heard. He came for me, and I thought, man, I've really done it now. I've really done it now. I got the formula. This is an original whiskey ashtray. And then I do have the matches that go with them.
The start of the 70s wasn't just Dee Dee's groupie heyday. It was also the beginning of her career as one of the most quietly powerful women in the LA club scene. When I met up with Dee Dee Keel, she had boxes and bags of memorabilia with her. She started by showing me some of her favorite pieces.
This is from On the Rocks. The back of this says, "Living well is the best revenge." That was Elmer Valentine's kind of lifelong motto, and he's right.
When Dee Dee was hired to answer phones in the upstairs office at the Whisky in 1971, she was actually just the latest in a string of other hip young women to hold that position.
Frank Zappa's wife, before he married her, had my position at the Whisky. Gail worked up there, and that's how she met Frank and went off. So basically, I took that from her.
It wasn't uncommon for the cool young hot girls of Hollywood to pick up jobs at the Whisky. But it was rare how long Dee Dee stayed there. Over the next 13 years, Dee Dee became one in a small handful of people who were indispensable, not just to the operations of the place, but as a confidant to the man who started it all, Elmer Valentine. Dee Dee had spent the late 60s promenading on the Sunset Strip. It got her noticed, and not just by other scenesters. So the story goes that one day in 1971, the Whisky's owner, Elmer Valentine, spotted a 20-year-old Dee Dee hanging out in front of the club. You know, as she did. Elmer had noticed Dee Dee there a bunch, actually. So on this day, he approached her with an offer.
"How would you like to answer phones for me for a couple of weeks?"
As for Dee Dee's onboarding process, she wasn't offered a job interview so much as she was invited to go on a trip.
He asked me if I would like to go to San Francisco with him to see the Beach Boys at Winterland. And I was afraid to go anywhere alone with them. So I invited my girlfriend Charlotte, who then at the time was the ticket taker. And she said she'd go. So we drove to San Francisco, and Elmer flew, and then we picked him up. And he arranged for us to get a suite in a fancy hotel. So we went to see the Beach Boys at Winterland. And I'm real nervous because I'm thinking, I don't know what's going to happen here or what's going to be expected because we had our own bedroom. He kept drinking and drinking, and I was getting more nervous. And we went back to the hotel, and we went in our room to get ready for bed, and I heard him call, "Girls."
Oh my God.
thought, this is going to be my first ever Hollywood encounter. Oh, no. So we go in and we hop on the bed with him, one on either side, and we looked at each other like, eeks! He passed out. That was it. And the next morning, we told him how great he was. That was that. That was kind of like I thought, looking back, maybe that was sealing the deal. I don't know. All I know is that he thought he was wonderful, and we never told him that there was nothing going on there.
So then you came back to LA, and then shortly after,
I started working every day in that office. And it started off, I was working from 11 to 7, and I was making $75 a week. I thought that was a really cool thing.
Hollywood encounters were, shall we say, an occupational hazard for many girls working in the music business. Obviously, they were par for the course for any girl hanging around the Strip. But that was all just part of the urban landscape of it. Kind of just like one of those things you knew was baked in about the place. I don't know, like smog. Dee Dee thought, so what if it took a potential Hollywood encounter to seal the deal? This was a cool job with a decent paycheck. I mean, in 1970, rent was like $150. Plus, she got into all the good shows for free. It was a pretty good gig, especially for the kind of girl who loved rock and roll and hanging out in Hollywood, and maybe also looked to a woman like Gail Zappa and thought, oh, that's how it's done. But to her father, this idea of a job in Sunset Strip nightlife sounded a little suspicious.
My dad didn't want me to work there. He thought that this was a terrible idea, a terrible place to work. And he actually went down to the sheriff's department to find out what kind of place is this. And they told him this was a perfectly good place and very safe, and that they're in there all the time and they were on them all the time. So he said, okay, I guess you're going to work there. The whiskey wasn't considered a real job to my family. It was a hobby. And they just let me go thinking, she's going to crash and burn. It's coming. It's a coming. It's a coming.
Of course, not all Hollywood girls were made. Some were simply born there.
So in 71, I was living just blocks from the Strip. I just felt like that's where I wanted to be. I did not enjoy school. I did not enjoy high school boys. It was all really stupid to me.
That's Morgana Welch, who was 16 when she started making her way onto the scene. This is around the same time a 20-year-old Dee Dee got hired at the Whiskey. Morgana was a sophomore at Beverly Hills High. While she was a latchkey kid living with her single mom in the middle-class flats of Beverly Hills, there was still a kind of conformity and stuffiness that Morgana was trying to escape by going to the Strip.
There were girls who had credit cards and unlimited budgets that they could go shopping, and, I couldn't. They were driving Mercedes and Porsches, and, I was hitchhiking down Olympic to go to school. I didn't have a car. And once I got into Hollywood, it kind of evened the score in a way. It was a different scene in Hollywood. We were all kind of the same in a way.
Morgana wrote in her self-published memoir, Hollywood Diaries, a story about her entrance onto the scene through a girl a couple years older than her named Amber.
There were a few girls from Beverly High that were going up to the Strip, but Amber knew everybody, so she was my entrance. If you went up there at noon, there was a party on the streets. So we just went up there and mingled, met guys, and got high. And yeah, that was fun. I was just very attracted to men older than me. I was attracted to musicians because from an early age, like even before the Beatles, rock and roll was my world. I was an only child and kind of lived with my radio. And so in a way, when you're listening to these musicians for so long, you feel like you know them in a way. So I actually wanted to meet them. And, it was all right there. It was not a stretch.
The culture was in a spiritual lurch between the end of the idealistic 60s and the upswing of the hedonistic 70s. The strip scene was changing at street level. New clubs were opening constantly, and even though the underage curfew cooled off around 68, the authorities still wanted the unruly longhairs out of sight and out of mind.
The cops were cracking down on people in the Sunset Strip and were trying to clear the streets. It kind of moved to Hollywood Boulevard for a while, but the vibe on Hollywood Boulevard was a lot different. It was just a lot more seedy than the Strip. So, once they kind of cleared that out, people headed more into clubs.
The Whisky A Go-Go's clout remained constant even as the vibes changed in the 70s. It was just one of those places that was consistently a scene, booking the best bills, always on the vanguard of rock music.
We would just go and just dance all night. And that's how we met a lot of people, just dancing. They liked the way we danced, they talked to us, so it was fun.
The Whisky was a clubhouse, a keystone in a music scene now world famous. World famous also for being full of beautiful young women who were, in some ways, in kind of a community with one another.
Yeah, I remember Dee Dee, like eye-rolling me in the ticket booth and, not really wanting to let me in, but, the bouncers there and everybody kind of knew me and they just let you in. They really didn't care. So.
Dee Dee Keel was a really good girl to know if you were somebody on the Strip, or trying to be. She had the keys. While a lot of other girls came and went, Dee Dee was a constant. I mean, a lot of the time, she was the only person actually in the office.
Yeah, so Elmer didn't come to work every day, and he didn't come for very long when he did. His routine was he had 2 dogs, 2 Staffordshire Bull Terriers, Bo and Annie. He lived on Kirkwood up in Laurel Canyon. So he would jog to work all the way down Sunset with the dogs. And he'd arrive, have his coffee, he'd read the trade papers. The Variety, the Reporter, Billboard, we'd be sitting there. I'd have to make sure that was all in order. It wouldn't be but maybe a couple hours. He would say, okay, I'm ready to go home, and I'd drive him home. And then I'd come back to the office, and he had it set up so that if I had a phone call, I could patch him in, and I would just sit there and do the bookings with him. He really liked me, and we were really starting to click. Like, I was really starting to realize that I was valuable to him.
Could you describe, some signs or feelings or sort of, validation that he gave you that you felt like you were valuable?
People will that were around would say, he was always yelling at you. He was always yelling at me. He wanted the best.
Elmer Valentine was a fascinating character who came to Hollywood in an effort, in the tradition of many a disgraced middle-aged man before him, to reinvent himself. The short version is, he was a vice cop in Chicago until he was indicted for extortion because he was on the take from the mob. So after his wife left him, he moved to Hollywood and had a grand idea to open America's first go-go club, modeled after the world-famous Whisky A Go-Go he'd seen in Paris. His would feature dancing girls in cages suspended from the ceiling, and an even rarer novelty, a female DJ. Her name was Patty Brockhurst. The Whisky A Go-Go opened in 1964 with perfect timing, at the moment when glitzy old Hollywood glamour slumped off to Vegas and the counterculture was just beginning to brew in its wake. Soon it became a premier live music venue, thanks in large part to some of the music-savvy girls who worked there. Take Ronnie Herron, their in-house publicist, who discovered this band, The Doors, who were kind of flailing to get a foothold in Hollywood. And she convinced her boss Elmer that they should book them as the house band, which they did in 1966. Mario Maglieri, the club's charismatic co-owner and manager, was more of the face of the place, but Elmer was the big man upstairs, making the decisions behind the scenes. Some musicians in LA were wise to Elmer's previous life, and the power players of the club circuit knew that Elmer still had ties to the Chicago mob. For example, there was some perennial beef with rival club Gazzarri's. from whom in the late 70s Dee Dee poached their house band, Van Halen. But before Dee Dee, there was another kerfuffle over a talent poach, and that was over Johnny Rivers. Elmer would brag decades later to Vanity Fair that when owner Bill Gazzari allegedly threatened Elmer with reputed Chicago mobster pal Chucky English, Elmer called in his personal friend and business associate, Milwaukee Phil, one of the most notorious hitmen of the 50s and 60s, and apparently got it all straightened out.
Most people didn't even know Elmer Valentine. He stayed quiet up in the office during the day. When he came into the club at night, he would literally stand in a corner and watch. He was a lot like me. He did it for the love of music and making money.
Dee Dee found a place for herself upstairs at the Whisky, behind the scenes. Her desk was right next to Elmer's, but by her own admission, she spent some time under his desk too. Their relationship was, as Dee Dee says, a lot more than boss and secretary. Partners in crime, maybe, maybe not, but definitely partners in some other stuff. It was complicated, but they saw something in one another. And it's not like Dee Dee wasn't eminently qualified to be booking the Whisky. I mean, come on. She'd been on the strip since she was in high school, seeing bands, taking it all in, and honing her taste, especially her ear for bands that were poised to take off. I mean, what could be more valuable than a cute, young, sexy ear to the ground when you're literally the owner of the West Coast's most important rock and roll club and you don't go out to see shows?
He'd tell me, go find this person. And I'd tell him why it was a good or bad idea or whatever. But I was out at night and I could say, hey, I saw this band. I wanted to book the New York Dolls. The New York Dolls, to me, were an up-and-coming phenomenon. Who knew how long they were going to last? But I went to Elmer and said, can we? And he went, this is it. If that bombs come Monday, you're fired. And I just went, okay, I don't care. I did, but I had to stand up and be as tough. And I came up to the club that night and the line was all the way up the block and they had literally scribbled out the ticket price and made it higher. And come Monday, I got another raise. Like, okay, I know what I'm talking about, mister.
It's hard for Dee Dee to pin down what her relationship with Elmer was exactly, even now.
Best friend, father, sometimes not so nice, sometimes very demanding, sometimes very rewarding. I felt like I was a mirror image of him. I didn't go out and I didn't want to do interviews or I didn't want to talk to anybody. I didn't want to be seen. I didn't want to have pictures. He and I were just in the shadows. I just stayed with him. He took really good care of me. Spiritually, financially, I don't know. It's not father, daughter. It wasn't girlfriend, boyfriend. It wasn't husband and wife. It was not best friends, with everything all mixed together.
Yeah.
I truly loved him.
Dee Dee played several roles in Elmer's life, and Elmer grew to depend on her in a lot of ways.
I realized that he would sit at his desk and he'd smoke pot a lot. So I was really his brain.
He could trust her. For one, she was sober this whole time.
I did a Quaalude one time, and then I got in my car and drove onto someone's front lawn, and that was it for me.
Okay, well, most of the time. It wasn't like Dee Dee was a prude about this stuff. She was just wary about the drugs circulating around the scene. Like, there was this one girl, Suzette, who became a cautionary tale.
There was a little girl that hung around with Elmer, and she was just darling. She would always hang around Elmer, and he'd give her money. And I mean, he felt very guilty after the fact because it gave her the freedom to do whatever she wanted to do. Well, she got so high that she drove her car into a tree on Laurel Canyon, leaving his house, and died. You know, you have to have some self-control if you're going to be in that environment.
When Morgana Welch started going out, she was in high school and was the ultimate vision of a classic California cool girl. She wore low-rise jeans with tiny little tops and knee-high snakeskin boots, or vintage full-length gowns that, with her blonde hair parted down the middle, was kind of Source Family chic. She was a precocious teen model who loved the occult and older men. She had friends who were sex workers and partied in the queer underground slightly off the strip on Hollywood Boulevard. She even has a story about spending a weekend hanging out with a trans groupie who was allegedly intimate with certain members of The Who. Morgana took cues from the trends all around her. But she wasn't a freak, she wasn't a hippie, she wasn't bohemian, and she wasn't glam. She was just cool. And hot. On one of her first big nights out, the summer before her junior year at an insider party, she encountered a well-connected young man named Rodney Bingenheimer. You know, Hollywood encounter style. Remember Morgana's friend, Amber? Her Sunset Strip wingwoman, fellow Beverly Hills expat who'd already been on the strip for a couple of years?
Even though she was a high school girl, she knew Rodney Bingenheimer, and she knew a lot of rockers. So it was her that introduced me to Rodney and took me to a party that he had. And when I went there, it was just not many girls and mostly guys in bands. And I think at that moment, it became real. It became something that I could participate and be a part of. Amber had a scheme to put a bow on me like a gift and present me to Rodney as a present, which was weird, but yeah, I would do it to go to the party.
The occasion was a going-away party for Rodney, who was heading to the UK. You know, just your regular, normal, teenage girl with a bow on top, human gift.
I did not get along with Rodney, but it was a good door opener. I had no clue who he was, but Amber told me who he was, that he knew everybody. And I always looked at Rodney as kind of a groupie himself, you know, prior to him becoming a DJ, because he was, you know, he liked to hang around with the guys in the bands. And I don't really know what his function was, but he had connections, and those are the people I was seeking out at 16. And I don't know, I think we hung out for quite a while. And at the end of the party, I think it was late and I had no way to get home. So I ended up staying the night at Rodney's house. It quickly went from fun to weird. I'll just say that because, you know, I didn't really connect with Rodney. I slept on his couch, but, you know, it was just very strange. And that was kind of one of my first very strange experiences of not coming home, not calling my mom.
The scene was turning into kind of a black market of social capital. It's not like social currency was a new idea in Hollywood, but it was kind of different that it became so fundamental to the way things were working in the music scene at the dawn of the 70s. Not just the industry, socially. And the more a girl was familiar with the way that things were working, the more those doors might open for her.
But yeah, Amber, yeah, it was kind of a weird relationship that I didn't really catch on to till much later. But she was very good at putting people together and hyping people up. So yeah, she really hyped me up to Rodney and got me into that party. And, you know, it was advantageous to her as well. Those kind of guys are always looking for someone new, you know, something fresh, something interesting. Like, hey, do you have any cute girlfriends you want to bring up to, you know? And what I got out of it is what I wanted. I wanted to meet these guys. I wanted to be in those circles. I wanted to go to the parties. So, you know, it was kind of a mutual thing for a while. And so, yeah, it worked out for everybody, I think.
Lots of girls were trying to find their place in the free-for-all that was the 70s Strip. A lot of them passed through the back channels of the Whisky. Dee Dee Keel was far from the only young woman who worked there. Functionally, the whole place was pretty much run by him. At the ticket booth, serving tables on the floor, making drinks behind the bar. It was kind of one of those cool girl on the scene jobs that feasibly you could get for a season to make a little cash, right when you landed in LA, or maybe before you hitchhiked to Greenwich Village, or left to join a commune in NorCal, or got married to a rock star, or whatever. But Dee Dee had a few more limitations to contend with than most of her peers, and it was something Elmer Valentine was keenly aware of.
He knew then I had a child, and he helped me by paying for her to have a daycare nearby at the Teddy Bear Nursery right down the street.
Dee Dee had a baby when she was 17, right in the middle of her teenage career hitting the Strip. And now, at 21, with a toddler, she had suddenly been offered a very convenient and attractive way of integrating the two parts of her life that by anyone else's measure would have been completely contradictory: motherhood and music.
There was one night when we were at the Whisky, and I really wanted to go to the club, but I had Amy with me at the time, and Elmer said, just leave her with me, and you go ahead and have a good time. And I came back, and where were you? Oh, we just went down to the studio to see Smokey Robinson. You mean he babysat my daughter? Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, you can't buy that. Some great babysitting.
I'm so, just amazed at your gumption, as a young pregnant woman, as a teenager, and still sort of continuing to follow your passion and go out and see the music.
I just felt like I didn't need to change my life for this person. This person's going to come with me on my life.
This person being the baby.
The baby. She was named after Eddie Brigatti from the Rascals' girlfriend, Amy Steele. I thought, oh, that's the most beautiful girl I've ever seen, and she's his girlfriend. So I named my daughter Amy. And she did come along for the ride.
For many young dreamers, Hollywood is like a shimmering, abstract idea of a place where anything is possible. It started out like that for Dee Dee, but working at the Whisky made the Hollywood dream become real. Real enough that she could build her life around it.
Going to Hollywood meant getting away from all the realities and just having whatever adventure lay in front of me for that evening. I never knew. It was exciting.
Dee Dee was sober. She was Elmer's eyes and ears. And while she was enchanted by the rock and roll dream, she was also looking at reality closely.
I didn't have blinders on, but I was acutely aware of everything around me. A lot of people that came into the Whisky to work were wannabe Hollywood rockers, starlets, actors, whatever you want to make of it, Honestly, through the 13 years I was there, they came, they went, they came, they went. A lot of them didn't last long. A couple of them were crooks. Couple of them just couldn't hang with it. Unfortunately, a lot of them that came up to work were cute little girls that Elmer had an eye for, and they'd come in and they just couldn't hack it, and they were gone the next day. Elmer always said to me, you have no idea how powerful you are. Don't hang out with the help. I didn't quite get it because I just felt like everybody else, but I do truly get it now. I mean, there were a lot of people that were really essential, but for the most part, I would say 85% of them would come and go. A lot of them would come in, fresh faces off the bus, and they'd go back all racked up and back home to the Midwest, wherever they came from. I don't know what they were expecting, but the music business is just still Hollywood. It's not all glitz and glamour. They were disposable. It's an awful thing to say, but it's true.
For Dee Dee, above any other perk of working at the Whisky, being Elmer Valentine's right-hand woman was business, and all that entailed.
There was a time that we took in some partners at the Whiskey, just kind of like in the shadow kind of partners, putting up money. But at any rate, it was a man who owned Sneaky Pete's next door. That was Pete Rooney. And then we had another man, Eddie Stevens. They were regulars in the office and good friends of Elmer. And Elmer thought it would be a great idea if I, before I come to work at the Whiskey, if I would just go and clean everybody's houses.
Just to briefly pause and reiterate, Dee Dee was functionally running the Whisky A Go-Go, and Elmer had just decided she was also going to start cleaning the club owners' houses.
And so I would start my day by going to Elmer's house and cleaning up, and then I would go to Eddie's house and clean up, and then I would do that and Pete, and then I would come to work.
Seriously, Elmer got Dee Dee to clean their houses.
Well, one day, still lived at home with my parents. There's a knock at the door, and it's the FBI. And they come in the house, and they sit down at the table, and they slap down photographs of everybody. And it was Eduardo Di Stefano. It was Emilio Valentino. It was all of them. And I just looked at it, and I said, I have no idea who those people are. And then the one guy says, well, we got your license plate number out of Di Stefano's driveway, so we know you do know. And I said, but I don't. And he said, and we're going to keep watching, and when you're ready to tell us, you need to call us, or we're going to keep on you. And so I said, okay. And they left. And I went to work, and I told Elmer what happened. And he asked me, what did you say? And I said, I don't know anybody. And he said, that was a good girl. And I got a raise. I didn't want to know because I just was there for the music.
Okay, so Dee Dee wasn't totally naive about Elmer's mob connections or his past life in Chicago. Elmer wasn't shy about it either. But it just seemed like the best idea, to both Elmer and to Dee Dee, perhaps each for their own reasons, that the less she knew, the better.
So I don't know. I don't know what that was all about, but in my heart of hearts, I believe it had a correlation to the bringing in of these partners. I didn't feel that it had much to do with Elmer, but I didn't want to know, and I thought if I didn't know, I didn't need to deal with it. So I went on my merry way with the rest of my work of helping in the office, which became very valuable in that I was able to come up with great ideas.
It interested me most while getting to know Dee Dee, hearing her stories about power and influence at the Whisky A Go-Go. If she ever thought to herself, why Dee Dee? Over all the other girls? Why her? What do you feel like Elmer saw in you?
Family. I think he saw family. He had married a woman named Helen and had the one child. He never saw much of her. He called me a lot. He called me while I was in the labor room at Kaiser Permanente because he couldn't find a phone number. And I had to direct him to this little thing on my desk called a Rolodex and help him get that number. He really couldn't do anything without me, which was a blessing and yet not.
As the 70s roll around and new blood comes in the scene, there was some tension between micro-generations of groupies. Sex, drugs, and rock and roll wasn't about growing up to be a rock wife. It was about never growing up at all. Sable Starr herself once said, "I never want to be anything over 14 years old. I'm just going to ignore the years from here on." The groupie quest for scene permanence soon mutated into a quest for scene dominance. In 1972, British rock journalist Nick Kent first landed in Los Angeles on behalf of the NME to document the Hollywood rock and roll debauchery for a British audience. In 1974, he interviewed Jimmy Page, who told him, "The last time I was in LA, there was this incredible groupie feud, which was getting down to razor blade sandwiches. The competition thing out there is incredible. You've got to keep out of the middle of it, or else, it gets you too. There's a new song we've done for the album called Sick Again. That about sums it up. Later, looking back on those times for Barney Hoskyns' 1996 book, Waiting for the Sun, Nick Kent recalled, "The really famous groupies were extremely tough and unpleasant. I mean, seeing these conniving, loveless little girls really affected my whole concept of femininity for a while. Talk to the bass player of Sweet, and he would probably say those were the best months of his life, but to someone with a bit of taste, who wasn't just hopelessly addicted to pussy, it was pretty sordid. It was a period of time where if you were skinny and English and dressed like some horrible Biba girl, you could have anything you wanted." In other words, goodbye, peace and love. Hello, glitter and glam. Wham bam. Thank you, ma'am. But remember, this was all happening during the reign of the one true groupie queen, Miss Pamela, who by her early 20s witnessed all this change and was like, no thank you.
I never really thought about age or anything. I was just enjoying myself. But younger girls started coming around the guys. And of course, that was new. That was something new. And a lot of these bands toured nonstop and they were incredibly bored. So anything new that was coming along, they wanted to be a part of. I found it distasteful that these people were so darn young, still in junior high, some of them, and it felt off to me.
Morgana hit the Strip at the same time as the baby groupies, but she was a few years their senior. Like literally, she was a senior to their freshman or sophomore.
Well, it was funny. I think they were only maybe 2 years younger than me, but we thought they were way too young. And I mean, they really were. And I don't know, there was some part of us that didn't like them because of that, because they were kind of infiltrating our little circle. And then on the other hand, and Pamela's, I don't know how much older she is than me. I thought she was really old. So.
Teens were attracted to the music scene on the Strip. And the music scene on the Strip was attracted to teens. And to be a savvy girl in this milieu was to be aware, amongst all this big music business money, that you had your own kind of value, maybe. Capital, for sure.
You would sit around and wait for a guy to pick you up. I mean, it was a musician we were waiting for, but yeah, I mean, it was transactional without money, but I mean, it was the same thing.
Girls were way younger, and there were way more of them than ever before. Less rock stars to go around, maybe, is the simple math of it all. And so some girls started to calculate that getting with a roadie or a manager was accessible or exciting or whatever.
And a lot of the girls wanted to be with them, not to get with the band, but because the roadies were great. But yes, like Sweet Connie.
Sweet Connie, by the way, was the groupie queen of Little Rock, Arkansas.
She was transactional, and she was proud of it. She would give some guitar tech head to get into the show to where maybe she could meet one of the band and get with them. And that's fine too. Whatever anyone wants to do that doesn't hurt anyone. I'm all for it, even if it's transactional. Who cares?
Though groupie motives and techniques were changing with the times, there was brewing in the cultural consciousness a central idea, a core tenet to the identity of groupie. And it hinged on this understanding that out there, particularly on the Sunset Strip, but yeah, all the way out there in Arkansas, were empowered girls who went after what they wanted. And yeehaw, they got it.
I wanted to ride every pony as long as I could ride it. And then when it was over, I'd figure it out from them. I didn't worry about what was going to happen. I didn't want to have that life where it was all set out for me. So yeah, my parents thought I was rebellious. Funny enough, in the end, my older sister said, we always thought this was just a phase you were going through. No, it ended up being a lifestyle. I had 3 children while I worked at the Whiskey. And oddly enough, I went into labor on the end of the week, so I never missed a day of work. Never missed one day. I brought the babies with me. And I was literally breastfeeding while I was answering the phones. I wanted a family. I had a bit of a rough childhood, and I had a feeling that the only people that were going to truly love me and get me and stay with me, I had to give birth to. So I had 6 children.
The rock and roll life for women who chose it gave them new desires, new freedoms, new identities, new potential. But often, they faced a lot of the same old problems. Women looking for a path into the scene were often navigating the fact that most of those paths were controlled by men. And for some women in rock and roll, they saw a few different ways to handle that. And it was worth it to become the kind of girl who could, because on the other side was a life that they wanted.
I want people to know really that I did have some power. I wasn't just going in there. I mean, this young man who works there now was kind enough to invite me into the Whiskey and give me a table and literally said to me, I'm going to put you by the backstage door so you can grab their dicks as they go on stage. Is that what you think of me? Well, a lot of people let that be the history because a lot of people want to take credit for things. A lot of people want to toot their horns. They want to be up front. They want to embellish an interview. They want to tell a fantasy idea. They want to glorify it. They want to make it villainized. I just want the truth. And it was a little of all of that. But I did more than sit by the backstage door. And I'm proud of what I did.
Dee Dee built a legacy without much precedent set before her. In this world that didn't really separate work and play, or to be more explicit, sex and the job, she found ways to make the most out of both sides of her life on the strip, as a girl on the scene and a woman behind the scenes. And yet, as the music industry developed into big business in the 1970s, the rock world was, at a clip, both industrializing and debaucherizing. And it was almost like the groupie thing, the working woman thing, both were becoming more legitimized, certified, professionalized, for better, for worse, depending on who you asked. Next time on Lost Notes.
It absolutely was about self-empowerment. And to realize that you are as good, if not better, than any boy in your high school.
The Oral History of Star magazine, the infamous short-lived magazine that turned groupie culture into teen culture.
From that magazine, I was photographed, thrown into the disco, thrown into the Whiskey, the Rainbow, all of that. That's when I hit the strip.
From KCRW and Golden Teapot, this is Lost Notes Groupies, Women of the Sunset Strip from the Pill to Punk. This season was created, written, and executive produced by Jessica Hopper and me, your host, Dylan Tupper Rupert. Executive producers from KCRW are Gina Delvac and Arnie Seipel. The executive producer for Golden Teapot is Lauren Redding. Our senior producer is Michael Catano. Our supervising producer is Alexandra Nelson. Our research producer is Jessica Calvanico. Sound design and mix is by Michael Hartman. Score and original music is from Carmen L. Special thanks to Natalie Hill, Megan Ellingbo, and Jennifer Farrow.